I was standing there, outside room 14, watching my daughter, Clara, sleeping peacefully, when I saw something I can never explain. A luminous figure, clothed in a sky-blue robe, knelt by her bed, gently touching her forehead with the most delicate hands I've ever seen. For a moment, time stopped completely. The beeping of machines faded, the nurse's footsteps in the hallway disappeared, and all that existed was this divine presence blessing my little girl. When I blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only a faint scent of jasmine in the air and something that would change our lives forever. But let me go back to the beginning of this story, because to understand the miracle I witnessed, you need to know the journey that led us to that moment. My name is Robert. I'm 38, an accountant in a small rural town, and I've never been what you'd call a religious man. I went to church on Sundays more out of tradition than true faith, and I've always had a very practical approach to life. I believed everything had a logical explanation, that hard work and dedication were enough to overcome any obstacle. My wife, Helen, was always different in that respect. She had a deep faith, the kind you see in her eyes, in the way she spoke about God, and in the peace that emanated from her even in the most difficult times. When Clara was born 10 years ago, Helen said she felt a special presence in the delivery room, like angels were there. I smiled and nodded, thinking it was just the emotions of the moment. Clara grew up as a normal child, full of energy and curiosity. She had curly hair that seemed to have a life of its own, always bouncing and dancing when she ran around the backyard. Her big, bright eyes reflected a contagious joy that lit up our home. She loved playing with dolls, drawing colorful flowers, and helping me in the small vegetable garden we kept in the backyard. On weekends, we used to go to the town park, where she would spend hours on the swing set, laughing and asking me to push her higher. The first time I noticed something strange was one March morning. Clara woke up complaining of leg pain and seemed more tired than usual. Helen and I thought it was just growing pains, those typical childhood aches. But the days went by, and she remained listless, unwilling to play, refusing the food she used to devour with pleasure. Her rosy cheeks began to lose their color, and those bright eyes seemed duller each day. When we took Clara to the pediatrician, Dr. Smith, he examined her carefully and ordered some blood tests. I remember thinking it was overkill at the time, but Helen insisted we do everything necessary. While we waited for the results, I tried to maintain a normal routine, continuing my work at the accounting firm, but there was a growing unease in my chest that I couldn't explain. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. Dr. Smith asked Helen and me to come to his office urgently without Clara. His tone of voice was different, more serious, filled with a worry that my stomach clenched. On the way to the office, Helen held my hand and whispered a prayer. I, who would normally have found that unnecessary, this time said nothing, feeling a strange need for any kind of protection. Dr. Smith received us in his office with a grave expression I will never forget. He began to explain about blood cells, blasts, white blood cell counts, but the words seemed to come from a distance. It was when he uttered the word leukemia that the world crumbled around me. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, he said, an aggressive form of cancer attacking my little Clara's blood cells. Helen collapsed in tears, and I felt like a giant fist was squeezing my chest, preventing me from breathing. As the practical man I've always been, I started asking questions about treatments, chances of recovery, specialized hospitals. Dr. Smith explained that we needed to go immediately to St. Cecilia's Hospital in the capital city, where Clara would be admitted to begin treatment. The trip to the hospital was one of the longest of my life. Clara slept in the back seat, wrapped in her favorite blanket, unaware of the storm brewing around her. Helen cried silently, praying softly, while I drove with trembling hands on the steering wheel. For the first time in my life, I felt utter helplessness, as if all my practical knowledge and problem-solving abilities were useless. St. Cecilia's Hospital was an imposing building, with long corridors and the smell of disinfectant that made me nauseous. The pediatric ward was on the third floor, and that's where we met Dr. Jones, the oncologist who would take care of Clara. He was an experienced man, with graying hair and kind eyes, who explained in detail the treatment protocol Clara would follow. It was weeks of chemotherapy, transfusions, medications that made my daughter nauseous and weak. I took leave from work to stay at the hospital, alternating shifts with Helen. Our days consisted of white corridors, beeping machines, caring nurses, and a hope that stubbornly persisted despite everything. Clara lost the curly hair we loved so much, but she kept her sweet and courageous personality. She made jokes to cheer up the nurses, drew flowers on the papers I brought her, and always asked when she could go home to take care of the garden. There was a strength in her that I couldn't understand, as if something much greater was sustaining her. It was during one of those long nights at the hospital that I met Father Michael, an elderly man who regularly visited the pediatric ward. Initially, I tried to avoid him, still resisting anything involving faith or religion. But he had a gentle way about him, never forcing conversations, just offering his quiet presence when we needed it. One night, when Clara was particularly weak after a chemotherapy session, Father Michael sat down beside me in the waiting room. He didn't say anything about God or prayer, just chatted about simple things: the weather, football games, the flowers they were planting in the hospital garden. There was something comforting about his presence, a peace I couldn't rationally explain. If you're following this story and identifying with these feelings of helplessness and search for hope, please subscribe to the channel to continue receiving accounts like this. Sometimes, sharing our deepest experiences can be the first step to finding strength and meaning in difficult times. As the days passed, the test results didn't show the improvement we all hoped for. The blast count remained high, and Dr. Jones started talking about more aggressive treatments, bone marrow transplants, options that sounded increasingly desperate. Helen, in turn, intensified her prayers. She spent hours kneeling in the small hospital chapel, lighting candles, whispering prayers I couldn't hear but felt in the air. Sometimes I'd find her asleep, standing up, leaning against the chapel wall, her face serene despite all the tears she'd shed. It was one of those early mornings when Helen fell asleep in the armchair next to Clara's bed that she had a dream that would change everything. She told me later, she dreamt of a field of white flowers under a golden sun, and in the middle of them, a woman dressed in blue and white with delicate hands extended towards her. The woman smiled and touched Helen's forehead, whispering words she didn't understand, but which brought an inexplicable peace to her heart. When Helen woke up from that dream, she told me she had felt a strange certainty, as if something very important was about to happen. I, ever the skeptic, tried to convince her it was just nerves and fatigue talking, but there was something different in her eyes, a light I hadn't seen in weeks. The next morning, Clara was weaker than ever. Her eyelids seemed heavy, and she could barely keep her eyes open. Dr. Jones examined her with a worried expression and ordered new blood tests, but we all knew the news wouldn't be good. I felt like I was losing my daughter little by little, and for the first time since it all began, I thought about giving up. That's when Father Michael appeared in the room. He didn't say anything, just put his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Sometimes, Robert, we need to stop trying to control everything and allow something greater than ourselves to act." His words irritated me at the time because I was a man of action, used to solving problems with logic and determination. That night, I decided to do something I had never done before. I left the room, went down to the hospital chapel, and knelt in the front row of pews. I didn't know how to pray, I didn't know the right words, but I started talking in a low voice, as if I were talking to someone I couldn't see. I said everything I felt, my fear, my helplessness, my love for Clara, my willingness to do anything to save her. When I returned to the room, Helen was sleeping again in the armchair, and Clara was breathing softly, with a slight smile on her lips. There was something different in the air, a quietude I couldn't explain. I sat down in the chair next to the bed and held my daughter's small, frail hand, feeling her weak but steady pulse. It was exactly at 3 in the morning when it happened. I was dozing off when a gentle jasmine scent filled the room. I opened my eyes and saw the most extraordinary sight of my life. A luminous figure, dressed in a sky-blue robe, kneeling at the foot of Clara's bed. It was a woman of indescribable beauty, with soft features that radiated infinite compassion. Her hands were crossed over her chest, and she looked at Clara with a love that transcended anything I had ever witnessed. I was paralyzed, unable to blink or breathe. Time seemed to stop completely. Not even the beeping of the machines could be heard, nor the footsteps of the nurses in the hallway. All that existed was that divine presence and the absolute peace it brought to the room. The figure extended her right hand towards Clara, and with a gesture of indescribable beauty, glid her fingers over the girl's forehead as if blessing every cell of her body. I felt a gentle warmth run through my chest, a feeling of protection and love I had never experienced before. Tears began to stream down my face, not of sadness, but of a deep gratitude I couldn't comprehend. In the blink of an eye, the figure began to dissolve, leaving only the gentle scent of jasmine in the air. I looked at Helen and saw that she was also awake, her eyes wide and her hands covering her mouth. We had both witnessed the same thing, and we knew that something extraordinary had just happened. When the nurse entered the room for a routine check, she almost didn't believe what she saw. Clara's vital signs, which had previously indicated progressive deterioration, were now completely normal. Her heartbeat was stable, her oxygenation at adequate levels, and her breathing was deep and calm. Dr. Jones was urgently summoned, and upon examining Clara, he was utterly perplexed. The blood test results that arrived at that moment showed a dramatic drop in leukemia cells, something he declared medically impossible considering her condition the night before. In the days that followed, Clara regained her strength in a way that astonished the entire medical team. She began eating with gusto, smiled for the first time in weeks, and asked to be wheeled out to the hospital garden. The doctors referred to her case as spontaneous remission, but I knew there was something much greater behind her recovery. Whenever I entered the room, I smelled the faint scent of jasmine, as if that divine presence were still nearby. Helen told me she had recognized the figure from her dream, confirming it hadn't been a hallucination caused by exhaustion. News of Clara's miraculous recovery spread rapidly through the hospital and then throughout the city. People began visiting the pediatric ward, bringing flowers, letters, and prayers. Some reported similar dreams on the same night, saying they had seen a woman in a blue robe bringing comfort and hope. Father Michael visited a few days later, and when I told him what I had witnessed, he smiled with an expression of deep understanding. "Robert," he said, "sometimes God gives us signs in a way that our rational minds can't explain, but our hearts recognize immediately." 3 weeks after that extraordinary night, Clara was discharged. All tests showed she was completely free of leukemia, something Dr. Jones admitted he had never witnessed in his career. He continued to monitor her case, but it was clear my daughter had been healed in a way that transcended conventional medicine. Returning home was a moment of indescribable joy. Clara ran to the vegetable garden at the back of the house and was ecstatic to see that the flowers we had planted together were blooming. She looked at me with those big, bright eyes, now full of life again, and said, "Daddy, I knew I'd be okay. The beautiful lady told me everything would be all right." That night, when helping Clara get ready for bed in her own bed after so long, she told me details about the visit she had received. "She was very beautiful, Daddy, and she wore a dress." That night, Helen and I talked for hours about everything that had happened. She told me she had always felt that Clara was a special child, protected by something greater. "Robert," she said, I've always believed in miracles, but I never thought I'd witness one so closely. I, who had always been a skeptical and practical man, found myself on an unexpected journey of personal transformation. The experience had fundamentally changed my way of seeing the world, showing me that there is much more between heaven and earth than my rational philosophy could explain. In the months that followed, our family was transformed. Clara was once again the cheerful, energetic child she had always been, but now there was a special wisdom in her, a light in her eyes that seemed to come from a very deep source. She spoke about the beautiful lady with a naturalness that moved me, as if that visit were the most normal thing in the world. Helen deepened her faith, but now I understood and shared in that spiritual journey. We began to participate more actively in the religious community, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine need to express our gratitude and share our experience with others going through difficult times. Many people began to seek us out, wanting to hear our story and seeking hope for their own struggles. I discovered I had a new mission in life: to help other families facing serious illnesses, offering not only practical support but also the assurance that miracles do happen. A year later, Clara was completely cured, and all tests confirmed that there was no longer any trace of leukemia in her body. Dr. Jones continued to monitor her case, not only as a doctor, but as a witness to something that had changed his own perspective on medicine and life. What impressed me most was how Clara had retained a vivid and affectionate memory of that night. She constantly drew a woman in a blue dress surrounded by flowers, and whenever someone asked about the drawings, she explained in detail about the lady who healed me. Today, 2 years after that extraordinary event, our life is completely different. Clara is 12 years old, strong, healthy, and full of dreams. She wants to be a doctor when she grows up, to help other children as she was helped. I completely support her dream, knowing that she carries within her an experience that few have had the opportunity to live. I returned to my work as an accountant, but now with a completely new perspective. I no longer see myself only as someone who organizes numbers and solves practical problems. I've discovered that I can be an instrument of hope for other people, sharing our story and offering support to families facing similar challenges. Helen and I became coordinators of a support group for families of children with cancer at St. Cecilia's Hospital. We visit families, offer our experience, and above all, our certainty that miracles happen when we least expect them. Father Michael remains a dear friend, and whenever we meet, he smiles and says, "Robert, you've learned that faith isn't the absence of doubt, but the courage to believe in spite of it." His words resonate with me more and more each day. The scent of jasmine still occasionally appears in our home, especially during important moments or when Clara is going through a difficult time. It's as if that divine presence continues to watch over our family, reminding us that we are never alone. A few weeks ago, Clara told me something that deeply moved me. "Daddy, I know the beautiful lady is still around."